de un tiempo que fue, de un tiempo va más allá de nuestra memoria. Somos llamados. Nuestras historias llegan hasta los primeros pruebas, los primeros pasos, el choque de mundos, sus comienzos abruptos. Todos somos nómadas de esta tierra. Hemos heredado el trabajo, incluso de nuestros antepasados, de los que estuvieron antes que nosotros. Somos llamados a cultivar la labor, llamando al presente. Las voces de nuestra gente nos llaman ahora. El mundo alberga sus alegrías y tristezas. Escuchamos el clamor de nuestra gente exigiendo justicia en este llamado. Reconocimientos, las voces de quienes deambulan en el desierto. Los cruzadores de fronteras, los navegantes, los buscadores de justicia, los soñaderos y los esperanzados. Dejemos nuestra historia con la historia de nuestros antepasados aquí y ahora. Estamos en el centro de responder a ese llamado de llega de todos los rincones de esta tierra, del sur, del norte, del este y oeste. Estamos llamados a sostener la labor. The voices of our people call us now. The world harbors their joys and their sorrows. We hear their cries of our people demanding justice. In that call, we recognize the voices of those who wander in the desert, the border crossers, the navigators, the justice seekers, the dreamers, and the hopeful. We weave our story to the story of our ancestors right here, right now. We are in the midst of responding to the call that comes from the corners of this land, from the south, the north, the east, and the west. We are called to sustain the work. Call from the future. The voices of those who will be call us, a reminder of who we need to be. In the weaving of our story to the web of life, we must remember that we must not cut the strings, for there are others coming after us, others with tender hearts and strong wills, with creative determination, those who will live in the house of tomorrow. Their vision escapes us. Yet we are called to prepare the road, to leave behind possibilities and foundations upon which they'll build a better tomorrow. We are called to create new opportunities. Llamado del futuro. Las voces de los que serán nos llaman. En recordadito de quienes debemos ser en el tejer de nuestra historia a la red de la vida. Debemos recordar, no recortar los hilos, pues habrá otros que vienen después. Otros con corazones generosos y fuertes voluntades, con determinación creativa, los que vivirán en la casa del mañana. Su visión se nos escapa, aún así somos llamados a preparar el camino, a dejar posibilidad como legado y cimientos sobre los cuales construirán un mejor mañana. Somos llamados a crear oportunidades. Amén y amén. Thank you. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you, Reverend Katie, for those beautiful words, reminding us all of the huge responsibility we're all facing these days. Welcome to All Souls. We are having our presentation in here so that we could record this. And so hopefully there are actually people watching us right now from their home. Lucky them. No. We've got the best breakfast in the back of the room. You're missing out, guys. And at the conclusion of the presentation, we are set up for the Eastside Creation Care Network meeting, which is regularly scheduled, and we invite you all to stay. so that we can hear about what this important local organization is doing. I also want to welcome some Faith in Place folks who have shown up from Bloomington and Illinois. Thank you both for being here. Restrooms are here, and perhaps at the conclusion of the event today, you might want to go out and check our beautiful butterfly garden in the back. It's, pardon? Yeah, solar panels on our roof. So we're just thrilled to have the network here with us this morning. And I'm equally thrilled to say that our two speakers here today are really some of Indiana's most prominent and active advocates for our environment in our state. Oops, sorry. So without further ado, I want to give you a little bit of bio background on our two speakers. We have Indiana State House Representative Sue Errington here from Muncie and a fellow UU. And she represents District 34 in Muncie. And she currently serves as the ranking minority member of the House Environmental Affairs Committee. Thank you. Cannot be an easy job. She's also a member of the Elections and Appropriations Committee and serves as the chair of the Statutory Committee on Ethics, also an incredibly important assignment that you have there. Thank you. She is one of 4 legislators on the Indiana Recycling Market Development Board of the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, and she is a member of the National Council of Environmental Legislators. So we are really, really lucky to have such a passionate advocate serving in our Indiana State Legislature. Yeah. Do I need that? Thank you, Gabe. Okay. Our second speaker hails from All Souls, Indianapolis. Indra Frank is a physician who has specialized in environmental health, and she has worked in environmental health programs, education, and policy since 2004. And she has been with the Hoosier Environmental Council since 2014, where she currently serves as the Director of Environmental Health and Water Policy. And she's a veteran of 9, God love you, Indiana legislative sessions. Indra's work includes keeping a close eye on Indiana's policies related to water resources. So again, 2 amazing champions who are working tirelessly to protect Indiana's environment. And I, without further ado, welcome our guest speakers to the podium.
Good morning, buenos dias. Yes, I'm Sue Errington, representative from Muncie, first elected to the Indiana House in 2012. So I've known Indra for quite a while. We're going to talk about what's likely to come up or may come up in environmental issues in the next General Assembly, starting in January. So we'll each talk about an issue and then have the other one talk, and we'll go back and forth a little bit that way before we get to the questions. I'm going to start out with the topic of solar energy. I have rooftop solar on my house, 28 panels. I've had it for 4 years, so I got in on the net metering. 15 years is what I got, not the 30 that the original people did. But I've experienced savings in my electricity bill. How many of you have solar? Several. So did you get in before net metering ended? Good. So my bills are, for maybe 7 or 8 months, are like $15 a month. So it's a real advantage both to the consumer and to the environment when you can use renewables. But there are a lot of people, because of where they live, it's not feasible for them. So that's why I want to talk about community solar. Did I go 2 or 1? Yeah, there it is. So many households and business don't have access to solar energy. Maybe it's because they don't own their house, they rent, or live in a condo where the association prohibits having rooftop solar. Maybe they can't afford it, or live in an apartment, or they're just in a too shady area for their roof to, their house to benefit from solar energy. So that's where community solar comes in. I'm going to put this on my phone here so I don't have to be looking over there. So community solar are local solar facilities shared by multiple community subscribers who receive credit on their electricity bills for their share of the power that's produced. Usually that's less than 5 megawatts a year. Community solar provides equal access to the economic and environmental benefits of solar energy generation. It expands access, particularly for low to moderate income customers, and it builds a stronger, distributed, and more resilient electric grid. Now, who has community solar? Well, there are 41 states, plus DC, that have at least one community solar project online, with 5.8 gigawatts installed cumulative through the first half of 2023. 19 of those states and DC have recognized the benefits of shared renewables by encouraging their growth through policy and programs. Unfortunately, Indiana is not one of those. And so that's why I introduced a bill to make it possible to have community solar in Indiana. I had a bill in I introduced my bill in 2022, and it went to the Utilities Committee. Nothing happened. So I talked with the chair of the committee, and he had expressed some interest in it, but he felt we needed to study it a little more. And he had chaired a interim committee, which is when we're out of session, and called the 21st Century Energy Task Force. And he told me it operated for 2 years. In the second year of it is when we talked. He told me he would put this on the agenda for one of the meetings. And he did. He was good to his word. There were several people who were experts in solar energy and community solar who spoke. I was really impressed with what they had to say. Next up were utility representatives. Well, they said it wasn't needed. They could already do that. And that was enough for Representative Soliday. He said, we don't need it. Well, one thing you learn in the legislature is you have to keep after things. You have to be persistent. And so I had the bill drafted again the next year. That would have been for this past session. But I didn't file it because we have a rule in the House that if a bill is in committee and doesn't get out, you don't have a second chance. You can't bring it up later. And so I wanted it to get a public airing. So I didn't file it. I saved it as a second reading amendment, which is a point in the, whenever all the legislators are there in the chamber, and you can offer an amendment to another related bill. So our legal people looked for another bill coming over from the Senate, and sure enough, one did. So I offered my amendment and was able to speak to it. However, again, it wasn't approved, so it didn't go anywhere. But at least it got a public airing. And this basically is what it said. The bill and the amendment were modeled after the Minnesota law because that state has a similar regulatory environment to ours. And this is how it would work if we could get it passed. The 5 investor-owned utilities would be required to create and publicize a community solar plan for their service area. My area is Indiana and Michigan, I&M. They would put out an RFP and then select 5 or more third-party applicants. These applicants could be private businesses, they could be nonprofits, they could be government. So there's quite a variety of applicants you could have. So after they got their applicants, the next step would be to submit the applications to the IURC. Are you all familiar with that? The regulatory agency in Indiana. And with IURC approval, the utilities would then implement their plan program. So this community solar would allow all Hoosiers to enjoy the benefits of local solar energy, including, and especially it would be important for low-income Black and brown communities, people who traditionally are left behind in the renewable energy transition. Because in the bill, at least 50% of the subscribers in a community and solar facility program must be low or moderate income. So, as I say, I'm not giving up. I don't know if it'll be a bill or another amendment, but there's going to be something in the next session if there's a suitable host. So now I'm going to turn the mic over to Indra to talk about the next issue. I was going to get my phone. There.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. We're going to switch from the energy arena into water. And Gabe, if you wouldn't mind putting the slide back up, that's great. One of the biggest issues that we have in the arena of water policy in Indiana is wetlands right now. And I'll give a little history to explain why that is. Just to start with, wetlands are the parts of the landscape that naturally hold on to water. Swamps, marshes, bogs, fens, there are a number of different types. And these areas are important in our hydrologic system because they can store excess stormwater, so they reduce flooding. While they're storing that water, it soaks in and recharges our groundwater. Wetlands also purify water, and of course they serve as critical habitat for many wildlife species. Indiana is a water-rich state. Before European settlement, 24% of our state was wetlands. And of course, with settlement, there was a lot of drainage to make way for farms, for roads, for buildings. We are currently at a point where we've lost about 90% of our original wetlands. At the same time, we're seeing increasing precipitation because of climate change. Compared to 100 years ago, we're getting about 5.5 inches more precipitation per year. So we need our wetlands more than ever. They're actually the most cost-effective stormwater management system there is. On the policy side, though, we have some challenges. Wetlands are divided up into the ones that are federally protected and the ones that are state protected. This May, the Supreme Court issued a decision that significantly cut back the number that are federally protected. In Indiana, we went from 80% of our wetlands having federal protection to only 20% or less. So what the Supreme Court decision basically said was the fate of wetlands is up to the states. So how is our state doing when it comes to wetland policy? Well, we're one of the states that actually does have a state wetland law. It was written in the early 2000s because there was recognition of the importance that wetlands play in our hydrologic system. But 2 years ago, in 2021, the Indiana General Assembly passed a bill to significantly cut back and roll back our wetlands law. This summer was the second-year anniversary of that law taking effect. My organization, the Hoosier Environmental Council, joined with 13 other environmental and conservation organizations to look at how that law has performed. Hold on just a sec. Oh, yeah. There we go. So Indiana's wetlands law is currently protecting only about 25% of the state jurisdictional wetlands. That's what the data show. So after 2 years of that change in the law, it shows that it rolled it back to the point where we're only getting 25% of our wetlands protected. So wetland policy is a big issue this year. The Supreme Court has ruled, now it's up to the states. The environmental and conservation organizations are active, talking with people about the importance of wetlands, talking to elected officials about the importance of re-examining what happened to our wetlands law. But along with the regulatory side, we're also interested in looking at the incentives that can be built into policy. The regulatory side places restrictions on destroying wetlands. On the incentive side, we can build in things like tax breaks for preserving or restoring wetlands. And it's kind of the most critical part of this, or the part that we think probably speaks to elected officials most strongly, would be wetlands' role in reducing flooding. So I've got a couple of graphics here to help illustrate that. This graphic shows a few wetlands and the fact that they're storing water. The EPA estimates that an acre of wetland can store up to 1.5 million gallons of water. So if someone comes along and decides, they'd rather farm that land or build something on that land, they destroy those wetlands, that water has to go somewhere else. Basically what it does is when you lose that water storage from the wetlands, you're sending more of the water downstream faster, so you increase the risk of flooding for those who live downstream. If you get a chance to talk to your elected officials, I've got a few points you can bring up. One, of course, is that the Supreme Court has left the fate of wetlands in the hands of the states. And so Indiana as a state needs to look after our wetlands. The wetlands provide critical wildlife habitat, groundwater recharge, and flood protection. And the third talking point I would encourage is that Indiana needs better wetland preservation and restoration. So we're looking to the next legislative session to hope for some improvements along those lines. With that, I'll pass back to Sue.
The next issue I'd like to talk about is PFAS chemicals. This is something that a bill was passed in this past session. The author, Representative Maureen Bauer from South Bend, it's possible she will do another one. We're at a point in the legislative process where people are beginning to work on their next session bills. And so it's, as Indra said earlier, it's hard to know exactly what's going to come up. But this one might be back. And so what are PFAS? Well, they are widely used, long-lasting chemicals, components of which break down very slowly over time. Because of their widespread use and their persistence in the environment, many PFAS are found in the blood of people and animals all over the world and are present at low levels in a variety of food products and in the environment. PFAS chemicals are found in water and fish and soil at locations across the nation and the globe. Exposure to PFAS in the environment may be linked to harmful health effects in humans and animals. And there are thousands of PFAS chemicals, and they are found in many different consumer, commercial, and industrial products, making it challenging to study. The bill that Representative Bauer introduced and got passed in the last session was a study. It was a pilot study of PFAS in firefighters. What had that exposure, what kind of effect did it have on them? So it's going to be studied. The results will be made public to the governor and the legislative leaders in 2027. So we'll know a little more about that in a few years. As I say, I don't know if Representative Bauer is planning to build on that, that bill that she successfully got passed, but we'll know at least by January. Now I'll give the mic back to Indra.
Another policy issue on the water side that has come up recently has to do with withdrawal and transfer. You may have heard of the LEAP Lebanon project. This is a project that the Indiana Economic Development Corporation is putting together near Lebanon, where they're bringing in a number of industries and developing about 10,000 acres of land. The industries that they're bringing in need a lot of water, and the Lebanon area actually doesn't have a lot of water. If you drill a well, you're less likely to get water in that area than you are in other parts of the state. So their proposal is to build large wells and a pipeline and bring water from Tippecanoe County down to Boone County to feed the industries that need water that they're proposing to bring in. There are, as you can imagine, people in Tippecanoe County that are very worried about this. There are people in Boone County who don't like having a large development brought in. The Hoosier Environmental Council is keeping a close eye on this, both because of the impacts of the land development. There are some wetlands and streams that would be impacted in the Lebanon area, as well as the impact on these watersheds. I mean, we're talking about taking as much as 100 million gallons a day from the Wabash River watershed to the Upper White River watershed. So the Economic Development Corporation has commissioned a study of how feasible this is and what the impact would be on the Wabash River. But there's also been some legislative interest in this issue. Right now, Indiana has what's called riparian water rights, which essentially means if you can pump the water, it's yours, and you can do whatever you like with it. During the 2023 legislative session, there was a bill introduced that basically said if you're going to pump 10 million gallons a day or more, you'd actually have to have a permit from the state, and you'd have to be able to demonstrate that you're not doing any harm with that amount. That bill didn't get through during the 2023 session, but we suspect it'll come back in 2024. So we're keeping an eye on that one. Another issue that could come back would be coal ash. Coal ash is the waste material that's left after we burn coal. Indiana is still a coal burning state, although the amount of coal that we've been burning has been dropping over time. We're currently producing on the order of 4.5 million tons of coal ash per year. Generally speaking, the ash is being stored next to our power plants, as it is in this particular photo. This is the Harding Street power plant here in Indianapolis. Our power plants were built next to sources of cooling water, and what that means is that they're next to either Lake Michigan or our major rivers. That also means that they're disposing of the coal ash right next to Lake Michigan or our major rivers. The majority of Indiana's coal ash currently resides in the floodplain, and a substantial amount of it is actually resting in pits that are deep enough that the coal ash is soaking in groundwater. The problem is that coal ash has heavy metals in it, and when it's in contact with water, it contaminates the water. For the last 3 years, there have been bills introduced to improve coal ash disposal in Indiana. They haven't made it through yet, but it's my understanding that Representative Boy, who's from Michigan City, is planning to reintroduce her bill again this year. Michigan City is a location that has a power plant right in the city, so the coal ash is very visible to the community. And with that, I'll pass back to Sue.
Okay, well, as you know, the legislature is not in session in the summer or the fall, but it doesn't mean we aren't doing anything. We have what you call interim committees. These are mirror images of the standing committees in the House and the Senate, but they pull the members of those House and Senate committees together to form one. And each standing committee has its parallel in the interim committee. So how does, and the point of the interim committees is to have more time to do a deeper dive in the issues that are being studied. So how do you decide what's going to be studied? Well, legislators request that an issue be studied, and we make the request to the legislative leadership. So that would be the House and Senate caucus leaders, the Democrat and Republican. In early June, they get together and review the list of topics that have been requested and make the assignments. Now, I think there were over 200 requests for this current interim period. So they winnow it down, and in order for a topic to be studied, 3 of the 4 legislative leaders have to agree that, yes, let's study this. Well, as you heard, I'm on the Environmental Affairs Committee. We had topics that had been requested, but not a single one was accepted by at least three of the legislative leaders. So, and that happened last year. So at least for the last 2 years, nothing has been studied by the Environmental Interim Committee. And I think the same is the case for the Natural Resources Committee. The one dealing with environmental issues that does have a pretty full agenda is the Utilities and Energy Committee. So they are studying things. But you would think with Indiana's poor standing among states on environmental affairs that we would have something that ought to be studied in depth. And in fact, Representative Boy has tried for the last 2 years to have the coal ash issue studied. She's even gotten chairs of the Environmental Affairs Committee to author those letters of request, but they were still turned down. So anyway, you can see the happenings on the interim committees. You can live stream them from the IGA website. So if there's another issue you're interested in, I'm on the elections committee. We didn't get any assignments either. But education is always a big one. Utilities, health. There are quite a few issues that are being looked at. So the next topic I'd like to talk about, and Indra will continue it, is how can you get involved? Let me talk first about how bills become bills. Sometimes it's an idea that a legislator has, maybe went to a conference, saw what some other state was doing, and thought we should make this an Indiana law too. So that's how some of them come up. Others, it's a lobbyist who goes to a legislator and says, would you introduce such and such a bill? Usually they approach the members of the majority party because that's the bill that's most likely to get through the process. Other times, a bill comes from the grassroots, from constituents. Somebody has an idea and they go to their legislator and say, would you introduce a bill that does this? In fact, my community solar came up that way. There was a businessman in Muncie who had a brownfield, and he wanted to do a small community solar project, but he found that our laws didn't permit it. He went to I&M and asked would they work with him on it. Well, it was too small potatoes for them, so they said no. That's when he came to me and said, can you help? Can we get a community solar project law here in Indiana? So that's when I started introducing, excuse me, the concept. Unfortunately, my constituent has died, so he's not going to see the fruit of whenever it actually happens. So anyway, if you have an idea that you think should be a law, talk to your legislator, or you can also look to see who's on the committee that would deal with this. And maybe you'll find someone there that would help you out. Now I'd like to pass the mic back to Indra to give a little more information on citizen engagement.
Well, I work for the Hoosier Environmental Council, so part of my job is to encourage citizen engagement. And with that, I'm actually going to send around a sign-up sheet. This is a sign-up sheet for the email newsletter from the Hoosier Environmental Council. We do not share or sell contact information with anyone else. So if you sign up, you will hear from us, but we won't pass your information along to anybody else. Our newsletter comes out about once a week with Indiana environmental events and news. During the legislative session, we keep close tabs on what's happening at the State House. So it would be a way to know what bills are coming up that have an impact on the environment. So Allison, if I could just send that around, thank you. As Representative Arrington said, it's important to contact your legislator. You are represented at the State House by 2 legislators, one in the House and one in the Indiana Senate. And it's not hard to find out who they are. If you, let's see, if I could put the slide back. If you go to your internet browser and you type in Indiana, find my legislator, it should take you to this website. It's the Indiana General Assembly's website. So the URL starts with IGA for Indiana General Assembly. All you have to do is fill in your address and click search. So I did that using the All Souls address. So for this building, the 2 legislators would be Senator Jean Breaux and Representative John Bartlett. And if we were to click on either of their pictures or names, it would call up additional information about them, like what committees they serve on, who their legislative assistant is, how to contact them, what bills they've introduced. And that's how you can get contact information for your legislators. It's important that they hear from us. They represent us at the State House. They're there to do the people's work. Not only that, but even if you have a legislator who you agree with all the time, I mean, you might feel like, well, gosh, you know, they always vote the way I would want them to vote, so they don't really need to hear from me. That's actually incorrect. They need to hear from you too, because if they're not hearing from you, they're only hearing from the people who disagree with you. And it's important for them to have kind of the backing of their constituents when they go to make those votes that you agree with, right? So that they can go into the floor debate or into the Senate floor debate and be able to say, I'm hearing from my constituents and they want me to vote this way. So definitely, you know, email, call, go to town hall meetings. I think I've actually got, yeah, here we go. So you can contact by phone or email, attend one of the town hall meetings. Most of our legislators will hold something in their district that's open to the public. Request a meeting through the legislative assistant. Maybe organize a small group of friends from the district so that the legislator would be meeting with several of you at a time. Come prepared for your meeting, because our legislators are very busy people. You may get 15 or 20 minutes, so you want to make sure that you've got your points in mind before you go, and then finally definitely thank them for the time. And I also want to encourage, contact your legislator more than once. They need to know that you're serious and you're not just going to go away after one meeting. And I think that takes us through the list of topics that Sue and I had prepared. But Allison, if there's time, I guess we could take questions. Oh, and I think wait until a microphone comes to you so that the recording will also catch your question.
Yeah. So I want to make a couple comments. Did I hear this right? Every bill that was being introduced was by a woman? Yeah. I think I heard that. I think we know who cares. And the other thing I want to say is legislators are actually just people, and I have found that your legislator really does want to hear from you. It may sound scary, but it really isn't. They really want to. They're just people, and they'll remember you. And it's important to not be intimidated by their title, and because they need to hear from us to get their business done. So, yeah, who's got a question? Howard.
Okay. I'm also known as John on my email. Sorry about that. I think I can maybe speak for everybody here, but I don't think most of us would just be involved in environmental enhancements, climate responses, without also thinking of injustice, who can get through, cope, and who can't. And that's also so strongly linked to health. Having lost 2 friends to pancreatic cancer, that seems to be growing. Is it the forever chemicals? I don't know. It just makes me worry a lot about what's already out there and in us. But how does justice and health show up in anybody of leadership in our Senate and House of Representatives? I know that's not a specific committee, but that is a value that if we say we value life, it's life at all stages and for all people. So that's the wording of that. The communications angle that I'm apparently not using enough is to talk about justice and health. And I'll let Dr. Frank maybe take the lead on that, either of you. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sure we could both. Yeah. So, environmental issues usually carry a disproportionate burden for lower income and minority populations, and populations that have historically been, less empowered. So it goes along with basically every environmental issue. And then my background is in environmental health. Every environmental issue has human health implications. So yeah, in working for a healthier environment means a healthier population. But on the policy side of that, Sue, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think more and more, at least the Democrats, when we do a bill that would impact low-income people, we try to put that into the bill. Just as my community solar bill set aside at least 50% of the subscribers to be low or moderate income individuals or families. I might say too that I've been following the money for EV and the refueling stations, and they seem to be trying to put more emphasis into low-income areas as well. Of course, that's yet to be seen how it's going to roll out, but I have been seeing some instances of that. I also attended an EV meeting of the state NAACP. They had it in Indianapolis. Did anybody go to that? They had it in Indianapolis and invited legislators. And so they talked about what was needed for equitable access to low-income people when Indiana is planning these stations for recharging.
So when the utility companies were arguing against your community solar ideas, could you tell me what they said was their objection, and then can you tell me what you believe their objection really is, which is usually profit?
One thing about the utilities, unless it's a public hearing where they do come and speak, most of their objections are done one-on-one with the legislators that have the most power. But what was said in that 21st Century Energy Task Force meeting was, it's not needed. The utilities could do it ourselves. But what my constituent found is they didn't want to do it in Delaware County. And I think that's the reason it hasn't happened anywhere. It doesn't, for so long, the utilities had a business model that totally depended on fossil fuels and generating power through a centralized station, while renewables are distributive energy. So it means less control for the utilities, and there's a concern that it means less money for their investors. So I would say money and control are two of the unspoken reasons they oppose it.
What's it going to take for the Indiana legislature to do something about climate change?
Well, years ago, I heard State Senator Louis Mahern, who was from Indianapolis, at a rally. This was an Equal Rights Amendment rally. And he told us, sometimes it's easier to change legislators than it is to change a legislator's vote. So we need some new faces in the legislature. particularly on the Republican side, because that's where the opposition to many of these, ideas get pushed back. That's why the redistricting was so important a couple of years ago. When every 10 years, because of population moving, we redistrict. But the power to change those districts remains in the hands, basically, of the majority. So there was a very big effort, the biggest effort in a long time at least, to have citizen input and to make a more even playing field. But in the end, we got the same old gerrymandered supermajority districts. So again, I think not giving up is very important when it comes to policy. On the renewable situation, Indiana is slowly changing. We're behind most of the other states in embracing renewables. When I first got in the legislature, I was in the Senate before I was in the House, we had about 90% of our electric energy came from fossil fuels. The coal industry in Indiana is, pretty strong in southwest Indiana. And at that time, it was pretty cheap. Indiana was one of the least expensive electricity generators in the country. But that's been changing, partly because of people understanding the health, environmental effects of fossil fuel. It's partly because of restrictions and requirements that the federal government is putting on utilities and, car companies, et cetera, to try to rein in some of those poor effects. Indiana is still very much below other states in embracing renewables. I think we're not even 50% yet. And our electric bills are going up. Where we used to be among the lowest, we're now at least in the middle of the pack. So all of us, as people who care about the environment or people who just care about what our electric bills ring up, this is an issue that everybody should be paying attention to and letting their legislators know what they think.
This is maybe an idea for discussion at the legislative level. With the chemicals that we're putting into our soil, for that matter, our air and water, that don't break down, have they considered doing a study on this, on that, and the increase in autoimmune diseases and autism?
No.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I know that there are studies of the health implications of the perfluorinated compounds that Representative Arrington was talking about, the PFAS compounds, and there's actually a huge public health literature on various chemical exposures. I'm not up to date, I have to confess, on the PFAS literature or on the literature about connections to autism. I very much suspect that there's a connection because autism rose so dramatically in recent decades. But yeah, did you want to chime in? Yeah.
I would just add that the state legislators are sort of the laboratories for different ideas. And even though the only study I know of in Indiana is the one that Representative Bauer authored. There are other states that are addressing this much more aggressively in Indiana, so they may be finding out exactly the questions that you asked as to what the answers are.
So I'm curious about how well poised Indiana is to really take advantage of the IRA, the infrastructure, help me out, guys, infrastructure, oh yes, it was the Inflation Reduction Act, yes, yes. I have word that one of our state agencies is planning on applying for a $200 million grant in order to help low-income households be able to put solar panels on their homes. Yes, so Indiana Housing. And I just wonder, even if the federal government sees fit to give our red state that kind of money, are we positioned to help our low-income households take advantage of that? I don't understand enough about solar, I guess, but are they going to run into problems with our utilities? Are utilities going to be able to absorb that? I just wonder, what's the environment here to be opening and welcoming to this incredible rush of new dollars that are going to help with moving away from fossil fuels?
I don't know any specifics, but anytime there's money available, policymakers and agencies are interested at the state and local level. I know in Muncie, this was not the IRA, it was a different one. Money that could come into the community flowed from the feds to the state, and then the state was offering money for to the locals. In Muncie, our city council decided that they would go to the neighborhoods in Muncie and ask, and they allotted a certain amount depending on what the neighborhoods look like. What would you like to see happen in your neighborhood that could be, this money could be used for? So those neighborhoods have, I think it's next year, they've got to come up with something and get it approved by the city council, and then that's money that would come into the neighborhood. And we have some low-income neighborhoods that are very well organized. So that's going to benefit them a lot, and it'll be the things that they feel are important in their part of town.
Are the power companies able to decide at their will whether they will credit you for the electricity which you produce on your roof? Because we had a lot of trouble this year. They were not giving us credit for anything for a long time, and we had a big fight with the power company, and finally have been able to have our electricity credited to us. We have enough solar panels to do 100% of our electricity, and they were not giving, they were just simply taking the power and billing us at $150 a month. So is there any way to rein these power companies in to actually obey the contract that's been made with them to use power?
Well, the IURC regulates, because they're monopolies, they are regulated by the Indiana Regulatory Authority. And so that would be, I don't know how you got your power company to turn around and begin to do what it was supposed to do, but they, I would say, would be the place where, you know, you would complain. That and the electric utility consumer advocate can take. And did you have to get a lawyer? Good.
And thank you all for joining this formal session, and we will continue a more informal discussion back in Harris Hall, and so I welcome any and all of you who would like to stay on for the Eastside Creation Care Network meeting. We've got a little time. If you need to take a break, feel free. We've got plenty of food and coffee back there. And but this concludes kind of the formal streaming of our program. So thank you, and let's continue the conversation.